Hey, deserving listeners. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist. I'm also a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I look for stars that are dark.
Dark stars. Anonymous patron and YouTube member from Syracuse, New York. She says, I have a question about me and my partner. My partner is my high school sweetheart, and we are getting married later this year. I disclosed an act of infidelity to my partner yesterday. We have been together for 11 years, and I regrettably had several instances of cheating through our college years. So just chiming in, it sounds like, okay, so they've been together for 11 years, so they're probably close to 30, and they were also, so maybe late 20s, because if they're high school sweethearts,
Right.
So, 27 or something. And in college, while they were in a very, committed relationship.
Oh, yeah.
She cheated a lot. Any thoughts on that?
Well, so there's two parts to that. One is, of course, any relationship where you are lying to the other person is not a good thing, and it leads to an unhealthy relationship. And then the flip side of it is that it is very hard, I think, for you to have coupling young enough in a free environment like college, if you are not really wanting to be in a committed relationship, but you still care for that person, because there's not really well supported or well understood methods for you to be in those kinds of relationships. Obviously there are, you can be polyamorous, all these things, but normally you're not shown these examples, you're not given these tools. So it feels like your only options are either I have to break up with this person who I actually do love, or I'll just have to do all this stuff with and not mention anything.
Yeah.
And it sucks.
That's what I was thinking too, that if we could rewind the clock and sit down with the two of them and have them explore what they want and what they're open to, and also teach them about ethical non-monogamy, which is a whole paradigm shift. It's a very hard journey to go on. It's not just a class or a book you read or something. Like, you have to really investigate and challenge your entire programming in this society. And if they emerge on the other side with some openness and flexibility, they wouldn't know yet because they haven't moved forward with their lives. And then if she, and maybe even him, said, well, I love my partner, I don't want to lose this person, but I'm getting a bit of the college itch to spread my wild oats, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do with that. Can we start to explore that? Is there a way to do that without threatening things or without hurting people or in a safe way? I wonder if that could have been accomplished, especially if they had a crystal ball and said, we're not only going to be together after this and be monogamous, but we're going to get married and live the rest of our lives together. We got together, we met each other too soon.
Sure.
We didn't get a chance to have our college jollies. And so let's have them right now within reason,
right,
so that we can really be satisfied with each other, move forward. Anyway, go ahead.
And it is a risk because, they could meet someone different and then they say, actually, no, I want to be with this person.
And the logical side of people will say, well, if that's what's going to happen, then it wasn't meant to be, right?
Yeah.
If you're meant for each other and you're in love, then you will choose each other in spite of having contact with others. Anyway, going on. I had disclosed them all previously soon after they happened. So, chiming in, sounds like the college days, she would tell him, going on. It was, of course, very painful for my partner and myself during that time. But I had kept one final secret all these years, and it has pained me. I told myself I didn't want to hurt my partner any further. Just chiming in. This is almost universal when I work with cheaters who disclose. The disclosing phase is usually doled out over time, and there's different approaches, but without fail, the cheater will always stop just shy of full disclosure. And I'm not talking about every gory detail,
Sure.
which is in all likelihood harmful for the cheated on partner to hear. But in terms of the number or
some specific person or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a number of factors. One is that whatever led them to cheat and hide it in the first place is still at play, and it can be intolerable to push against that. And also the hurt can mount over time. And also there's almost this like running a marathon where you're disclosing and you're almost to the finish line and you're like, I can just walk the rest of the way. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I don't, or I can bag out on the last mile and you know, I basically ran a marathon.
Yeah.
And it's because you've just been fatigued the whole time. It's hard. And you just think, well, I basically told him and everything. And then that decision of kicking the can, or I'll tell him that final one next week or something. And then you just keep kicking the can down the road. And when I work with cheaters along these lines, I tell them all this stuff and say, don't do that. Because one, it'll plague you.
Right.
Two, it's incomplete. Three, most of the time, your partner will find out, or you will tell your partner 10 years from now, and it'll be even more hurtful.
Sure.
The cat's out of the bag. You've cheated. And there's, you know, the incremental little additional hurt compared to all the hurt is so small compared to the amount of hurt that will happen if you wait a long time.
And the re-injuring of bringing back up all those. Yeah.
And the question that will naturally arise, which is, well, what else have you not told me about? You know, how am I supposed to trust that this is the final story going on? So I told myself I didn't want to hurt my partner any further. I disclosed that final cheating story from college yesterday. It felt awful, and I just hope it was for the best. It went well, I think. I do feel some relief knowing I know that I no longer have to lie by omission. Yesterday was understandably somber in the hours after I disclosed, but after some time, my partner began to be increasingly sexual, much more forward and sex-driven than usual. We ended up having sex, and it was slightly more intimate than usual. But I was very aware that it felt odd to me to have very intimate sex after such a day. This same thing also happened years ago when I disclosed my other cheating instances. I feel like it was makeup sex. At least that is what came to mind, and I've heard of this in movies. Haha. Have you experienced this with clients before? Any thoughts on why this might happen? Thank you. Psychology in Seattle has a huge influence on my life and has helped me and my relationship so much. Berto, what do you think?
I have a couple thoughts. One is that obviously the hurt is real. At the same time, there is something happening when the person confesses and explains that, hey, they want to do this. Because it is also sending a message. Like, if they didn't care about the other person, they would either just break up with them, never give them an answer or an explanation, or just say like, things are just not working out. Let's just break up, right? Or they would just not ever tell them, just lie to them forever, right? And I'm simplifying it, but that's one way that the cheated upon party might feel. But when they hear the confession, let's say, in addition to the hurt and the pain, there might also be that other aspect of like, but they do care enough about me to like try to make amends or come clean. So there's that. So that in itself might, in the right circumstances, bring like a new closeness in that sense. The second part is that the person doing the confessing, like on the one hand, and I've certainly heard this, on the one hand, there's an aspect of that confession that can seem selfish. Like you just don't like having this on your mind, so you're just wanting to get it off your back, but you don't care how it's going to hurt the other people. And that can be. And it could also be that they really do feel bad about it, and they want to try to make amends, and they feel that they can't unless they come clean. And because in a way, it's like, look, I want to put the ball in the other person's court now and say, if you don't want to be with me, here's the reason. but I want to be with you, and I hope we can work this out. Okay. So when you take all those factors, I could see a situation where after you do the initial session of confessing and then maybe processing it for a bit, if that does lead to that feeling of closeness, like, okay, maybe you do love me enough and maybe I'm okay with it, or maybe it'll take me some time. I could see like a moment of physical intimacy that might feel, strong, but it doesn't mean like things are magically solved. And it might just be that the next day it's the opposite, but I could see that happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you imagine yourself feeling that way?
So there's three versions of me. High school version of me, no. I would have just been like, okay, we're done. Bye.
Right.
College version of me would have been devastated. And I actually don't know how I would have dealt with it, but it wouldn't have been good.
Angry,
all these things. Current version of me would be like, obviously hurt, but totally willing to work with it.
Yeah. Would you have a sexual urge, like a turn on, or
the way I feel right now as I'm talking about it? No, but maybe.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we don't know what his motive, because that's kind of the question I think you're asking, anonymous patron and YouTube member, which is, what's the motivation, or is this typical, or is this common? And what I'll say is that it's not uncommon. I've certainly heard things like this before, both personally and professionally. And it could be a lot of things. The first thing that pops into mind is that it could be somewhat pathological in that he wants to stake his claim. There's a pathological version of that, and there's also just a benign version of that.
Sure.
But as long as it was consensual, and it sounds like it was, and it was intimate, right? It wasn't like grudge fucking someone.
Oh, yes.
Right? It was intimate. So that lends itself towards a desire to connect, a loving gesture, or a leaning in instead of running away. And I think that this might be particularly true for people that grow up together, like high school sweethearts, is they serve a lot of roles in each other's lives.
Sure.
Not just romantic or marriage partners, but also family members in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like siblings, not in the, the incestuous way, but in a way that, like your high school sweethearts with your wife.
With college, we knew each other in high school.
Right.
Our first date was after high school.
The shared experiences, not only that you've had throughout.
No, exactly.
But even the memories that you can talk about from your own childhood.
Absolutely. So I have spent more time with this individual than any other human being, right? And those memories, like you're saying, go back to a point where I was not an adult yet.
Yeah, you both were children.
Even when we weren't dating, we were still friends. We still have memories with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that creates a really strong bond.
And when I think about my friends that I grew up with since preschool, there's a lot of pros to it in that there's no pretense, because we've seen each other through all the ridiculous phases of our lives. And there's also a lot of trust, because what could possibly happen that hasn't already happened between us that could cause us to break up with each other, right? Even if we pull away for a time, we'll always come back to each other. So anyway, as long as it was consensual, which it sounds like it was, then there might be a lot of different purposes. It might be all these things. It might be none of these things. It might be one of these things. But of course, sex can be connecting and bonding. Sex can be healing, just individually, but also relationship. It also could be a renewing, right? Of, hey, I have this vision in my head. I know this happened years ago, but I have this vision in my head of you having sex with someone else. I want to erase that. Sort of like cleaning or washing your bed sheets or something,
Right.
Or when you move into a new apartment and doing a full bleach clean of everything, it can feel spiritually like you have purged that life of the bad spirits, sort of thing.
Right.
It could also be kind of a purge as well, a purge of your feelings, of your anger and hurt. and a way to do it physically, right? Because there's a lot of symbolism when it comes to sex. It's an unspoken, or you can't put sex in. Trying to explain sex to aliens, for example, is impossible. It's like, what do you say? It's like a tickle, but it feels good and it's compelling and it's like otherworldly.
Wouldn't the alien go like, "Oh, you mean sex? Yeah, we have that too."
All right, let's take a break. We get back. More emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, back from the break. Long-term patron Tracy from Minneapolis, she says, is not liking hugs always a PTSD symptom due to trauma or something like it? Are some people just naturally very unaffectionate, even though they grew up with good boundaries and with no abuse or neglect in their childhood? It always disturbs me when someone never wants to hug anyone. No one ever has to hug me, by the way. I just can't fathom it. I am definitely a hugger, and it's very concerning when someone doesn't want to hug. Berto?
What? Why are you asking me?
What is your response to long-term patron Tracy from Minneapolis?
Well, just randomly with no relation to anything related to me. No. So here's the deal. As the years went by, I developed this thing where hugs would make me uncomfortable. And
really, when you were younger, you didn't have it?
Maybe I did.
But weren't aware of it.
But I wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
It's just that, and I wasn't aware of it even as an adult. It just was a thing until you and I started talking about it, because you would like notice it. And then I was like,
oh, really?
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a thing where I was like, I hope no one hugs me today. No, it was just simply, and the way it would feel for me is claustrophobia. That I'm like, too much touching. Yeah. Too much touching.
So I'm remembering now this whole thing that after years of hugging you while I'm full chest to you, both arms. I mean, I'm not like caressing you and holding you for 5 seconds, but the typical.
We're spooning.
Yeah. And you're like 90 degrees to me, so I'm hugging like one shoulder, and one of your arms will go up and barely touch me.
Tap.
Yeah. So
the double tap.
Yeah. And I just thought you were not paying attention or something.
Sure.
And so I said something like, when you hug me like that, it's hurtful, or it's weird, or it's, if you don't want to hug, that's fine. And you're like, no, I like to hug. I like to hug. And I was like, okay, well then fucking both arm it, my friend, because we're good friends. And so let's do this.
And it's interesting because in your case, like you're a little taller than me. So when you go to hug me, that might have even felt more enclosing.
Okay.
And like, I don't know this theory is fully right, but I'm imagining like our friend Chong, which I never hug him, I don't think. But if I did, like I might be more in control of the situation because he's shorter than me. I don't know. But either way, what I did start noticing after, a while was, it doesn't feel comfortable. Something about it feels like I'm being encapsulated and like it's too much touching. I don't want this. I just want light. And we've discussed like what I really like, which is light, gentle scratchies, which is like the lightest of touch with the nails. That would drive many people, including my wife, crazy. Like if I try to do that to her, it's like, stop, it like irritates her immediately. Whereas that's all I want all the time. And the theories I've had are things like, well, when I was little and my mom had left and I was living with my aunt and my grandma in Colombia, I would sit, I would like lay down my head in their lap and they would give me back scratchies. And those back scratchies felt amazing. I was like, and it felt like, I'm back in my little cocoon. I have a mommy again, all these things. And so that felt good. So I can understand why the scratchies part feels really good. But I'm not sure about why the hugging part, other than the sexual abuse maybe. But
do you ever put your head in your wife's lap and are the little spoon, so to speak, in various different vulnerable cuddling?
Yeah, as long as, so for example, Because related to hugging, one thing, and I've gotten a little better, but for the longest time, if she laid her head on my shoulder, it's fine. If she laid her head like on my chest, I would start feeling uncomfortable.
Claustrophobic.
Yeah. It's very weird. But me laying my head in her lap, yeah, I could see that.
Okay. Yeah, the scratchy things, it feels like little spoon stuff. Yeah. So we can hypothesize pretty confidently that this tendency for you is a specific manifestation that not everyone would have, but makes sense given your history. Your mom abandons you. Your dad wasn't touchy-feely or particularly warm, right?
Right.
And there's some complications there. But what Tracy from Minneapolis, what she's asking is, I think she has observed people in her life who don't like to hug, but there's no discernible trauma or issue.
Right. No, in fact, I'm the opposite. Like if you had asked me, in fact, you mentioned it, I, in theory, like to hug. I grew up in a culture where you hug. And not only do you hug, when you greet a woman, you go like, kiss, kiss, on the cheek. So I do on paper like to hug. And in fact, when I greet people, I do. I somewhere along the way, something short-circuited, and I didn't notice it at first, but it was like certain kinds of hugs make me uncomfortable because they're related to the claustrophobia thing or something,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So, different people have different preferences, but one, it's possible, Tracy, that the people that you have observed who don't like to hug don't know about the sort of traumas that they went through. Because if we had asked you, Berto,
Right.
when you were younger, you would say, no, there's no traumas to speak of along these lines. There's
Right.
nothing overt. It's not like you were held prisoner by a hugger. You know what I mean?
That's interesting too, because, okay, so there's also another thing. When I was young, like meaning late teenage years, early 20s, my way of hugging like close friends or maybe even someone I hadn't seen in a bit was I would pick them up. I would like bear hug and pick them up. Mm-hmm. So you would think, oh, well, then what's the problem? But it's because it puts me in control. And but if you think about it, it's a way more aggressive kind of thing.
Well, it's also potentially distancing because
Right.
there's an activity you're doing.
Right. And I'm not saying I did this consciously at the time, but it might have been the same discomfort that instead of going in for a soft, quote, normal hug, I'm like, oh, hey, I'll do,
Yeah, make a little joke about
right.
it. Yeah.
And it's interesting.
Yeah. Right. There's also an increasingly shit ton of body shame and touch shame in our society. It's just getting worse and worse. I mean, it is so bad. I think about this one moment in reality TV a few years ago on 90 Day Fiancé where, I can't remember their names, but they were from Samoa, and the man, the husband or fiancé, he was greeting his mom after not seeing her for a long time. She flew in from Samoa, came to, I think, Vegas. Anyway, and when he saw her, they kissed. And it was unclear if they kissed on the lips or on the cheek, and they were just so exuberant that they misaligned their kiss, and they ended up sort of kissing on the lips.
Right.
But it's, the sort of kissing you do with family when you're greeting. And not only did the wife ridicule him and say it was disgusting and weird, but a good portion of the audience as well.
Oh.
And in my reaction video, I reacted against all that because what kind of a sicko looks at a son loving his mother,
right,
and they kiss even on the lips, which I do with my mom, by the way,
right,
and with other family members in my family. What kind of a fucking sicko draws a connection to sexuality from the outside? I mean, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
That you would, now, maybe if you've been traumatized, then God bless you.
Yeah.
But knock it the fuck off.
Yeah.
This is, when you see a 4-year-old boy kissing his dad goodnight, do you think the dad is fucking the child?
Jeez.
Like that, there's something wrong with you, and it's normal in our society for people to fucking do that.
Yeah, like you said, it is understandable and unfortunate if it brings up your own trauma, like because maybe that did happen to you.
Fine, which I would understand.
But you're right that I think, in fact, sadly, a large part of society is like there'd be the homophobia. Right, like, oh, that's a boy, that's a dad. Like, what are you doing?
But there's also just incest phobia or sexual abuse phobia.
Right.
People have reacted so strongly and in a very unsophisticated, stupid way that they throw the baby out with the bathwater, literally, kind of. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, yeah, let's be aware of sexual abuse. Let's have boundaries.
Right.
Let's give children their space. Let's
let them say no when they don't want.
Exactly.
All that stuff.
But let's not eliminate physical warmth and affection, which is the bread and butter of attachment and human life.
Yeah.
So you can have someone who, because of society and maybe their family, aren't comfortable with hugging because they've never really had that kind of thing. And two, they're terrified of the kind of associations that they've been told. And three, if they're a guy, which gives it even more paranoia, they don't want to be accused of sexual harassment or, sexually abusing a child, right, or being suspected of that. And there's all sorts of possible reasons why a non-traumatized individual would not want to hug. The other possibility, Tracy, is that you smell bad. I'm just going to throw it out there.
Sure. A little spritz.
You're in Minneapolis, so I don't know, you're near Wisconsin. So is there a lot of beer and cheese happening? And you're emanating cheese curd and Budweiser smells? That's just another theory I have, Tracy, about you. Just joking. All right, let's take a break. We get back. More emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. By the way, my sister and all of her clan lives in and around Minneapolis, Duluth. So I love me some Minneapolis folks.
But that's why you don't hug them.
Anonymous postal worker, they say, I was just listening to your podcast rerun on how to treat men as client, when you're treating men clients. I work for the U.S. Postal Service in the region's largest mail sorting facility in Tukwila. Berto, did you know that the region's largest mail sorting, like United States Postal Service?
Sigma, Alpha, Beta.
Yeah. Did you know that was in Tukwila?
No, of course not.
Yeah, that's interesting because Tukwila doesn't have a large footprint, Tukwila proper.
No.
Because it's sandwiched in between like Renton and White Center and Kent.
When I worked in carpet cleaning, our office was in Tukwila.
Okay.
But I didn't realize that they were sorting mails just around the corner.
Yeah. You say Tukwila, interestingly.
Sorry, tequila.
Yeah, you said it kind of like tequila. Tequila. But anyway, so going on, they say, I work there. Recently, a coworker of mine shot and killed another coworker.
What?
Then ran off and drove away. I actually got this email recently.
Oh my God.
So this was a new thing. He was found a ways away in his car and had killed himself. Oh. I heard he died sometime later in Harborview. So it sounds like it was a somewhat botched suicide attempt, but eventually was successful. Going on. There's barely been any discussion in the press about this murder, suicide. This is just small potatoes in today's context, I guess. There's even less real information, but besides being in a difficult work environment, there was significant bullying in the two men's history and a big size strength difference. So just chiming in, what it sounds like anonymous postal worker is saying is that there was bullying suspected on the shooter, like the shooter was the victim, and the victim was large and the shooter was small or something. I don't know if there is anything here you want to explore, but FYI. And before you ask, thank you for asking. I'm fine. End of email. I don't know what the anonymous postal worker wants us to respond with, but Berto, do you have a response?
So first of all, I mean, we were all joking. Tequila, blah, blah. And then you're like, and then he shot. I'm like, whoa, this took a dark turn. It is a postal employee, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that comes to mind is the whole going postal thing. They even had do you remember that video game that was banned?
No.
There was a video game called Postal, I think, where you would play a postal employee who starts shooting people.
Right.
So, of course, it was banned. But this sounds a little different. Well, obviously it is a shooting, but it seems like it was more personal. Like this person was specifically being bullied by the other one. How horrific. The anonymous postal writer says that maybe this goes unnoticed in today's, but actually, because I've never experienced something like that in my surrounding work environments and things. So no, I think it's horrific and not that usual in this area that we live in.
Yeah.
So I can imagine how traumatizing that would be for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. To say you don't know when someone's just gonna snap or when they're gonna kill. I mean, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So I think what you're wanting me to respond with in relation to my episode on how to treat men is that it's possible that the shooter, due to toxic masculinity, was stuffing his feelings and not asking for help and turning to aggression and anger as a coping mechanism, and might have even had behaviors and impulses to be more healthy, but was pushed back on by others. Regardless of gender, we've all absorbed toxic masculine ideals. And if a man reaches out to us or gives us a signal that they might be suffering, we tend to ignore it. This is even seen among children. We have observed this in research that when a boy exhibits vulnerability or sadness or disappointment or fear, the parents, even parents who know better, will tend to lean on average in the direction towards, well, you can handle this. You're a big boy. Regardless of gender of a kid, there's always that line where you're trying to decide, is this a situation where I need to get down and hug them and listen? Sure. Or is this a situation where I need to say, you can handle it on your own? You're okay. I hear you and I'm with you, but you can do this. You got it. You know what I mean? And whether that's, they have a bad interaction on the playground, whether that's seeing a snake in the wild, or whether that's the first day of preschool. When you see your child going through an emotional experience, on average, regardless of gender of the parent, we tend to treat boys through that toxic masculine lens, which is just ridiculous. It's like there's no difference emotionally for these humans.
So you're saying they would get on average less emotional assistance or empathy in those moments.
And a lot of messaging around like, you got to be strong, and no one's here for you. No, there's no point in bringing up your vulnerability because we're not here to listen.
And it makes sense. I imagine, I don't know what the circumstance was in this work environment, but I could easily imagine it where someone is getting, bullied in various ways, maybe verbally abused, maybe even physically to some extent, and coworkers around just kind of like, look the other way and like, I don't want to get involved in this thing.
Yeah, not to mention whatever sort of toxic masculine trauma hole the bully was suffering from. But anyway, another email here, annual patron Vanessa from Wisconsin.
Oh.
So I've managed to insult two people because I was associating Minnesota with Wisconsin. But
isn't that where you wear a cheese hat?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wisconsin is cheese hat territory.
Nice.
Vanessa from Wisconsin, she says, I have been vegan for ethical reasons for the past 7 years. So probably a lot of cheese.
Right. That's a vegetarian.
I assumed that, well, wait, is cheese vegan?
Cheese is not vegan.
Cheese is not vegan.
Cheese would be vegetarian, but not vegan.
I see. Okay, well, then there's no cheese.
Right.
Unless it's
like tofu cheese.
Tofu cheese.
Yeah.
I assume they make tofu cheese.
They make cheeses that are not, that
like
are
from
vegan. Yeah.
from vegetable oils.
Yeah.
So I assumed that most people suspected the inhumane treatment of animals on factory farms, but often wondered if they didn't care or didn't care to know. But then I was surprised when a long-term friend came to me horrified after viewing footage. So just chiming in. So, what she's saying is, I just figured that they looked the other way or didn't care.
Right. But that they knew that it was coming.
Right.
Yeah.
But, but I'm surprised when a long-term friend came to me having discovered this for the first time in 2025. Okay. Do you think if people really knew what was going on, they would change their behaviors, or perhaps they would block or deny this information to prevent cognitive dissonance? Or going back even further, despite modern research, maybe there is denial that animals have the capacity to feel physical or mental pain. End of email. Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a combo for sure. Number one, I totally agree that most people don't know where the food comes from, or how it's made. Like, look, I grew up in the middle of a big city where grandmas would show up with food. Food was in the fridge. They would cook. I would eat. I have no idea where it comes from, what goes into making it, or anything. And I never grew up on a farm or anything. So even though I guess I'm smart enough to probably have figured out that at some point the chicken I was eating was alive, I never gave it a second thought. When I was living here in the 90s and the mad cow thing happened, I remember that was the first time I started thinking about these things. Because when I read about what was happening, which was that they were feeding the cows like all sorts of leftover and weird things, including brain matter from like sheep and other things, I was like, wait, what? So then, like, I boycott, like I would not eat steak and meat or red meat because of that, right? I didn't want to catch that disease, the prions and stuff. But I got a little more interested. I remember hearing about the book The Jungle, back from the 20s or whatever, the Upton Sinclair, and then I started actually like looking a little bit into it. But it wasn't enough for me to go vegan or vegetarian. I was just like, oh, that's interesting. So even after I started knowing about this, it still wasn't enough. So I was still like, yeah, okay, that sucks. I'll avoid red meat. And years later, when I became vegan, or partially vegan anyways, it was still not because of that. It was because I was trying to change my health, like what I was eating. It was several months or maybe even a year into doing it that I had then seen all these other videos and stuff where I actually started caring a bit and being like, well, there's also potentially some animal mistreatment going on. So yeah, I think the majority of people don't know / don't care.
No. I think people do care.
Yeah.
So I could talk about this for a long time, actually. But for the sake of time, what I'll say is that there's a barrier between the truth and 99% of the population of my community anyway, or I don't know, 92%, something like that. If that information was focused on more, because think about if you're the local news station or you're a podcaster, to even look barely into it is to very much freak people out. And unless you're an actual chicken, then you don't gain anything from it. There's no money in advocating for these animals, There's no vested interest. They're not relatives of ours. They don't vote.
Yeah.
And there's no incentive. So people that even know about this scenario aren't likely to look into it because it's not economical. Two, when it is focused on, it's so disturbing that people will see one flash of an image or something and will be so overwhelmed with terror and empathy that they instantly have to turn away.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happens is that even if you stare into the void and actually absorb what's happening, there's almost nothing we can fucking do about it because this is government level regulation shit.
Yeah.
What can an individual do, especially if your typical middle class or lower middle and you can't afford to buy free range sorts of stuff, or you can't afford even to be vegan because that can be expensive, So there's no incentive, there's no way out.
Yeah.
The only people who can manage this is rich people, people who can actually spend the extra money. But there is an answer to this, which is government regulation level and an approach to public awareness that is not terrifying and disgusting to people, which there's a lot of stuff along those lines, which I get. But at the same time, if we're going to slowly shift the culture, which has already happened to some extent, that there is a little bit more awareness, but not nearly enough.
There definitely used to be. I remember when organic stuff first started coming out, it was only like Whole Foods or something. Nowadays, you can go to like Safeway. Every place you go to, they have organic sections.
Well, the organic label is an extremely dubious, and even the free range label, because the limited regulation, the limited government taxes that are spent on regulations and regulators that would actually adjudicate and punish those who are false advertisers. So what needs to happen is that if you know anything about farming, you know that it is paycheck to paycheck.
It's expensive. You risk losing it all in one bad run.
Right, and they often do.
Yeah.
So you don't have the luxury of having free range, doubling the square footage of your chicken area, because that'll jack up your prices by 1 or 2 cents and then you're done, right? So this has to be a government imposed on everyone, and then everyone wins. The farmers don't want to mistreat their animals. They see it. They're doing it,
The small farmers, they're the industrial ones. They don't see it. They don't care.
Well, the industrial ones are primarily focused on money, right? But even for them, the individuals that work there, if they can make money and not do horrific things to animals, then they'll do it, especially if the government is forced. Regardless of empathy, if the government imposes, right, and that's what needs to happen. It's the same when it comes to pollution or exploitation of the citizens.
Yeah.
You need regulations. So if you did that across the board, it would raise prices. It would absolutely raise prices, but economy of scale and expectation of the consumer of, instead of looking at extremely cheap eggs and chicken and sausage and stuff, it's like, okay, I guess I saw this whole series of studies that predict that you could increase the humane treatment of chickens, for example, in terms of the square footage of their area to run. Even that would not be ideal by any means, but it would be a little less horrific.
Right.
And the study found that it would increase chicken breasts that you would get at the store by an order of like 0.5% or something. It was very little increase.
And it would decrease the number of diseases that you end up consuming. And
it would increase the price, and that might impact a few things, but that would reflect, and 90% of people would gladly pay, because they've done research on that too. Even lower middle class people, would you pay an extra 5-10% to be assured that this animal was treated this way instead of this way? The vast majority of people are like, absolutely, that sounds great. I don't want animals to go through horrific. Now, as you're saying, Vanessa, in Wisconsin, with all your smelly cheesiness. Just joking.
It's vegan cheese, so it smells like lavender and roses.
And your Milwaukee's best beer. I'm joking. There are some people who don't think that animals have souls. But whether or not you're delineating between souls or not, the vast majority of people I have found have shifted since I was a kid, in that most people do not consider animals to just be automatons. When I was a kid, my sense of things was that most people thought of animals as automatons.
Yeah.
They thought of them as just like a plant,
And that they're faking screaming in agony when their little baby is being taken.
Right. It just doesn't matter. I don't hear that anymore. I'm sure it exists, but I don't hear that anymore. I think with more pets being in homes, that kind of thing. Anyway, so Vanessa, that's the answer. For us as individuals to try to educate the people around us, for example, just with chicken. If you want to continue eating chicken, what options are out there? I'm sure that there are options out there. I don't know, but they're not very prevalent. And the advertising that you will see in the store is, from my understanding, 99% of the time it's misleading. The free range and all that kind of stuff, because it's not regulated. So for the average consumer, even if they wanted to pay more money for this sort of thing,
they can't be guaranteed that they're going to get it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Even if it's a company that advertises themselves as, even if it's a vegan company that advertises themselves as totally on the up and up, and they're not dumping chemicals into the environment, without regulators and without regulations, that vegan company might not even know for sure the supplies that they're getting to make their food actually is on the up and up. We need regulation and policing and tax dollars, and then we all win. Another email along these lines, YouTube member and anonymous patron from the UK. They say, firstly, thank you so much for the podcast. I'm not exaggerating to say it has changed my life.
Whoa.
I struggle to find words to do it justice. The quality of the episodes and information is outstanding and not something I would have ever thought I would have access to. I am a small animal veterinarian, only 1 year into my practice, and I care deeply about the animals and their owners that I look after. With your pets, what has been your experience of vets? What have you found most helpful? Oh, I see. So YouTube member and honest patron is doing research about how to be an effective
vet. Yeah.
So with your pets, what has been your experience with veterinarians? What have you found most helpful? What have you found frustrating? I look up to you and would love to reflect on your input here to think about how best to support people. Berto, what do you think?
Okay, so I've had 3 cats, 1 dog. That's the context. All of them small. I will say, generally I've had good experiences with vets, but there are a couple of things that stand out. So one of our cats, when she was getting very old, she started having heart problems, and we took her to the vet a few times, and then they recommended one procedure, which we did. However, she kept getting more sick, and then there was a more expensive operation, which we did. And then they were like, okay, so now you have an option. We could do this even more expensive, very risky operation, or you could just make her comfortable, right? So it was a very difficult experience, but it was, quote, good in that the vet was empathetic, and they explained everything to us very well. So like that was a good experience. And we ended up getting someone, and it was during the pandemic, so we had to have someone come to the house and help us put Tara down, which was super sad, but it was also like the poor thing was in like a massive amount of discomfort. So the flip side is this was really frustrating, where we were having these issues with my dog, Mabe, who's a little mini Aussie Shepherd, where I think she was 1 year old or something. She kept having these things where she would like throw up, and dogs throw up, right? But it was like it's happening a lot, and like she like jump off the bed and all of a sudden and then throw up, and we're like, okay. So we took her to the vet, and then they ordered all these expensive tests, and we had to take her twice. They did all these expensive tests, and at the end, it was like, yeah, just watch what you feed her. Just watch what you feed her. And I'm like, what do you mean what do we feed her? We just feed her the food. It was like the opposite experience, where we didn't get enough like explanation or guidance through it. Instead, we just paid a whole bunch of money. Nothing got fixed. Luckily, she over time didn't do it.
Yeah.
But it just felt like, well, I don't know what value you just provided me.
Right. So let's assume that the tests were valid.
Right.
And standard of care.
Which I'm imagining.
Then at some point, the lead physician should have a prep in their own mind about how they're going to explain this and also guide the family forward.
Yeah.
And it would be something like this. Okay, so we were concerned as physicians, we were concerned about a number of categories of problems, whether it's this or that or this. And so that's why we did the initial wave of tests, because in our minds, those were the most likely scenarios. It turns out those were negative. The dog was still throwing up, and we're worried because, it could be something serious.
Yeah.
We also knew it could be something that we either can't detect or just, she has a quick gag reflex or something. Or maybe she's not eating the right kind of food. It's just a matter of certain kinds of kibble, gets to her. But we were still worried, and we were thinking that Maeve is only a year old. If Maeve were 16, we might have a different recommendation. But we're thinking, let's give Maeve a long and happy life here.
Yeah.
So we ran another set of tests, and I know they were expensive, but we wanted to rule out some other things, and it's possible that some of those things might have turned out. Turns out those also didn't find anything, which is a relief.
Right.
For me. But now I am at the point where I'm thinking, we could maybe look at some really rare scenarios, but if I were to take a guess clinically, I would say that this is possibly a food selection issue or something that's just a benign throw up response that your dog has. It could be something in the environment, like a smell or the way you hold her.
If you did 10% of what you just did, that would have been amazing.
Yeah. It doesn't take long to fucking do that.
Right. And because ultimately what it was is it was a combination of two things that I think are wrong. One of them is we live in an affluent area. We live in an area where there's a lot of people who work in tech and things like this. And so there's a lot of money floating around, right? So I think one of the assumptions is like, the cost is irrelevant, right? The second part, which is the worst part, is like essentially, I'm assuming you're doing something wrong as an owner, right? So I believe the tests were probably all good. And like you said, it's good that they didn't reveal there was no blood, there was no this, all these things. It's simply a matter of like the empathy part, the bedside manner, and like, don't assume I'm doing something. I mean, even if I am feeding them the wrong thing, like educate me, don't put this on like, anyway. So yeah, so that was,
and as a therapist, we're trained, hopefully anyway, and we have ongoing conversations and consultation about this very thing, because as clinicians, we can fall into that trap too, of blaming the client and communicating that even to them. And we have a robust understanding of the causes of this, one of which is internal shame, that we don't know what the problem is, or we feel ineffective. We don't feel like we went through enough schooling, or we feel guilty that we charged all this money and we're not helping in some ways. And we can't cope with that shame and that guilt. And so we will use a defense and blame the client and give this message of, well, it's your fault. Yeah. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. And it's just like, it's no one's fucking fault. Right. Grow the fuck up and be a clinician.
And notice that the good example I gave led to my pet dying. That was my good example. But it was good because everything was well explained to me. I felt empathy. I felt supported through the process.
Yeah, you walk the humans through the scenario and through your thinking. And, even in my somewhat lengthy little role play, that took 2.5 minutes at the most.
Yeah.
And it's literally me imagining what to an actual veterinarian, they would be able to rattle this off the top of their head like no problem,
And in this case, it's like, well, ultimately it was okay, but it felt bad and expensive at the time. So
right. Yeah.
So that would be my advice is do more of the first. Be empathetic. Don't assume your clients are idiots, and help them through it. Guide them through it.
Yeah. And as you know, YouTube member and an anonymous patron from the UK, you know that a good portion of a veterinarian's job description is end of life. So getting good at that sort of thing in all the different presentations.
Yeah.
For example, well, what I'll say is overall, a lot of the vets that I've worked with, and I've probably worked with, over the years, like 50 plus different individual veterinarians. But whether it was just a one appointment or ongoing or something. But one bad experience, I'll say, is that I brought my cat in, and Obama was his name, and he had previously been predicted that he would die soon because he was having symptoms and he had cloudy lungs in an X-ray, and it was predicted that there was nothing anyone could do. They put him on antibiotics as sort of a Hail Mary, and pretty strong. They're like, these are really strong antibiotics that are gonna kind of fuck up his gutty works for a bit, but if this is end of life, then it's worth a shot. It ended up working, and he went on to live another several years.
Wow.
And so when he had the same symptoms a while later, I brought him in again, same office, but different vet, because the vet that I wanted to work with is actually a friend of mine from college, was busy. So I got this new guy, and he brings Obama in the back and does an examination. And, I'm worried, but the symptoms weren't very severe. Right. And I didn't wait until it got really bad. I just had seen, maybe he didn't eat food, because that's one of the things cats will do. And the vet comes back into the exam room, or where I'm sitting, and says something to the effect of, and he doesn't have Obama with him.
Okay.
So he takes Obama back.
Oh, geez.
Then he comes back in with me, and he says, gives some sort of really dry explanation of what the diagnosis is or what's happening. And he says, and so, I'm recommending euthanasia.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, what? Like, it's in my head, I'm thinking, well, let's do that antibiotic thing again. But he says this to me, and it's a huge shock. It's just like, whoa. And then I'm like, I'm just kind of absorbing this reality, or this diagnosis, or this recommendation. And I'm like, okay. What sort of timeline are we talking? He's like, and then he says, well, I can do it right now.
Jeez.
And I'm like, give me my fucking cat.
Yeah.
I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Now, it turned out that Obama was on his last leg.
Sure.
But he was nowhere close to the sort of doom.
Plus, do people not understand the relationship you have with your pet?
Yeah. He was offering to off my cat behind closed doors.
I can just rid you of this problem right now if you want.
Yeah, I could flush him down the toilet. He's someone's holding him over the.
Oh my God!
And all you got to do is nod your head, and I'll kill your cat, and you can.
It's like they've never had their own pet.
I'm just like, give me my fucking cat, you monster. You know. I mean, I didn't say that, but I'm like, I would like my cat now, and I'm gonna leave or something.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, it's your call. And
it is.
and he, and he was mostly fine, but I just thought, this is not the way you deliver that kind of news. And it turned out that it was, like I said, Obama was declining, and lived another, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks before I did finally euthanize. But so looking back, the vet was, I think, right. Now, it's possible that the vet was just right for the wrong reasons, in that because years previous, the vet had said this is the end of the line as well, and that wasn't true.
Sure.
So they could have been right based on limited information. But anyway, the point is that I concluded, okay, let's just go with the vet knew what they were doing.
Sure.
But had no way of understanding because if he would have came in and brought the cat, brought Obama, and then sat me down and said, so, here's what I saw. Here's my experience. Here's the percentages. Here's the outlook. Because given Obama's age,
Right.
And there's a possibility we're looking at a sharp decline in quality of life. And you don't talk about euthanasia because I haven't talked about it.
Right.
I'm not expecting that. Obama's still meowing and purring and walking around.
You're aware of what can sometimes happen, but it doesn't have to be like...
I'm not a dunce, you know what I mean? Take one step at a time. Now, I get it. If you're a vet and you're on the grind, because vets don't get paid very much. These are full-blown physicians who are, paid percentages.
I get it, but dude, even with a car, so like even a car, let's say I take my beater car in for service, right? I still don't expect the person to come out and was like, dude, the car is on its last legs.
No.
We can crush it right now for you, right?
Well, I'm not saying lack of empathy for the patient. I'm saying that it's all about productivity. So it's the amount of appointments you can churn out in a day.
That's
so
fine.
it can be a grind, and especially if you're doing like 15 euthanasias over 2 days, it just gets a little much.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other part of being a vet, is you can get burnt out, similar to being a therapist. So, there's that. That was one bad experience. I'll say the vet was probably right, but just did not know how to gauge where I was and help me move wherever I needed to go in the next step. Another bad experience I had was that Michelle, because it was Obama and Michelle, I don't know why it wasn't Barack and Michelle, but I named them spontaneously during the election in 2008. And when I said it, I thought those are really stupid names for these cats. But once I had named them,
they were named.
they were named.
Yeah.
And so I was bringing in Michelle, and we were having an evaluation, and it was looking like euthanasia was in the cards. And Stacy was with me with this one, and the vet, and Michelle was mostly my pet. And 80% my I was responsible for all the things and and so Stacy loved the cats, but so Stacy was there for moral support.
Right.
She wasn't there at all for gathering information or making decisions about anything. Like she was
to support you.
Yeah. So the two of us, Stacy and I, are having a consultation with the vet, and the vet, she is I'm the one asking all the questions, and the vet would hear the question and then turn to Stacy and answer all the questions.
Oh, wow.
Like the vet looked at Stacy the whole time.
Assuming that's her kitty and you're just there for the ride.
Because what kind of a guy likes cats?
Yeah, dude, come on. Grow a little spine, will you?
It was really fucking weird. And at first, I'm like, not really noticing it. And then I start noticing it. I'm just like, well, maybe she just likes talking to Stacy. Over time, I'm like, Stacy's not asking anything.
Right.
And it's pretty clear I'm the main person of concern. I'm the main concerned parent here.
Yeah.
It was blatant fucking sexism.
Yeah.
I mean, it was obvious after, and I'm sure this vet is a nice person. She was an Asian American sister. I'm sure she's a great.
It's just an assumption, yeah.
And it's so fucking dumb.
Yeah.
In the middle of Seattle, you're gonna assume. Now, I'm assuming there's a lot of possibilities. But Stacy agrees that there's really no other explanation, as far as I can tell.
I mean, if you were there with a Rottweiler, okay, I get it.
But to be treated that way, so on one hand, it's like it hurts in so many ways.
Sure.
Because I'm so fucking tired of people saying, are you a dog person or a cat person? And all I want to say is, if you are either, there's something wrong with you. Because if you don't like dogs and cats, I don't want to be friends with you, honestly. Like, how can you not like dogs and cats? Like, what kind of a monster doesn't like both dogs and cats? also get your fucking toxic masculinity out of your mouth. You know what I mean? I'm going to slap it out of you. Like, stop it. And don't impose it on me. And this whole notion of like...
Are you a parakeet or hamster guy?
It's just like, fuck off with that bullshit. And like, I like cats, so what? Like, I'm femme?
Yeah, pretty femme.
Or I'm, I'm a pussy or something, literally. It's just like, everyone loves cats and dogs. If you have a heart... Now, if you, listener, don't like cats and dogs, it's probably because, one, you've had bad experiences, and or two, you've never actually had a good cat or dog.
Or just never had one. Like, for example, I've told the story before, but I grew up in a culture where, I was taught that cats were evil, cats kill babies, and I never met a cat in my life till I moved up here. And then I never wanted a cat as a result, but then in 2005, I bought a cat for my wife. It wasn't for me. And then I fell in love with that kitty.
Right. Whenever I meet someone that says they're a dog person or they don't like cats, without fail, they've just never actually just never had a cat. If you've actually had a cat, you understand. And the dog reality is much more out there. If you've never had a dog, like, you can get an idea of what having a dog would be like. But if you've never had a cat in your house that you live with, it can be hard to imagine what it's like to have a cat. It can also be that you've just had really horrible cats. Some cats are feral and unpleasant and horrible and hate humans,
You can really tell a psychopath when all the bad things, they always refer to them as treating things like a dog. Like, treated them like a dog. Or that's anyone who says that repeatedly, they're just not a good person.
Right. I wish I was treated like a dog.
Yes.
At least our dogs. So that was, I bounced back, but I did note it and say, are other vets looking at me funny? Is it because if a vet, you just think a vet would get that dudes like cats.
Yeah.
Like what's the problem here? Anyway, so that was one bad experience. But, like I said, hundreds or thousands of experiences with vets that were positive, if not, extremely warm and empathetic, walking me through the scenario, going slow, proving to me that they really love the animals. When they enter the exam room, they are very careful and very loving towards your pet. Very empathetic around euthanasia, in some ways like spiritual healers. The vets that do this kind of work show up at your house, that kind of thing, the emotionality of it. So, but in terms of specifically what's been experienced, what have I found most helpful? I think we've been over that. Found most frustrating. I feel like we've been over that. I think another aspect to navigate, which you might not have much control over, anonymous patron and YouTube member from the UK, is the navigation of essentially the health system for our pets.
Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
haphazard. I don't know what it's like in England, but here, first of all, you can get pet insurance. It's pretty pricey.
Yeah.
And then if you don't know about it, like it's sticker shock when you go to take care of a pet and have all of a sudden they're like, yeah, they need an operation. It's $1,000. It's $2,000. And you love your little animal. So you're like, okay, how do we scrimp and save for this thing? And if you don't have insurance, which most people won't, it's crazy.
Right. So having a way of raising that question and that calculus in a empathetic, responsive way, because that's what parents are thinking, that's what the owners are thinking of, just like, okay, because we've all been there. It's like, okay, so this is a $15,000 procedure, and how many years will that buy? What's the percentage of buying us another 5 years? If it's a 5% chance of buying us 6 months, then I don't want to pay $15,000 for that, Whereas if it's 95% chance to buy us another 7 years, and you're not predicting the future because you don't know, but based on your experience, unbiased, right? Because this is $15,000 I'd be giving you,
right?
Then that's a different scenario. But not only that, but also just access, because Stacy and I have run into so many different scenarios where there will be, an urgent care, not an emergency room kind of a thing. And with living in the middle of North Seattle with like all the pets, I would venture to say there's more pets living in homes than there are humans in North Seattle. Like, no joke, right? All the cats and dogs. And yet trying to establish an ongoing care scenario. Like we have our vet and our vet office, and Leia, our little dog, had a complication, and we wanted to have Leia seen pretty quickly. Maybe not like that day, but soon. And we called our normal vet office.
3 months.
And it was something like that. We're just like, no, that's not, we're not talking about like that kind of appointment. And they're like, well, we just don't really have anything. And there are urgent care offices, but sometimes, at least in my experience, they'll go out of business frequently, or you have to sit in their waiting room for 5 hours, maybe hoping that someone will be able to see you. And so, you're not necessarily, anonymous patron, going to be directly connected to the community's access of services, but if you can keep an eye out for that, or at least have empathy around that, and if you do have influence around that, it's like, hey, let's set up a referral service, or let's set up a website that guides people through the decision making of what's urgent, what's not, and who to call or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, these are important things because, often when it comes to concerns health-wise for our pets, they're pretty severe. The kinds of things us humans run into, it's like, oh, I have the flu. It's not likely life-threatening. But the kinds of things we run into with our pets, by the time we see something, by the time that the pet indicates that they're going through something, they're often in a real dire place.
I remember, like, again, when my dog was little, one day she's outside in the yard, and all of a sudden I see her gnawing on something. I go, look, she's eaten some mushrooms, which, as you probably know, some mushrooms can be poisonous.
Right, yeah.
So I'm like, what the hell? So what do I call? Who do I take? I eventually did all the web searches and stuff, but I need help now. So, luckily it was the kind of thing where I could send a photo of it, and then they were able to calm me down and stuff. But imagine if I couldn't get through, or if no one's willing to help me, and my little doggy dies because I didn't know I couldn't.
Right.
And that stuff happens, or they get hit by something, or a coyote attacks them, or any number of things can happen to these little animals.
Now, just as an asterisk to that this happened recently with our little dog as well, like, I don't know, a few months ago. I'm not saying this is what you're supposed to do, and there's probably a lot of problems with this, but I will say what I did, and it did help. That she had found, or Stacy left, you remember Ding Dongs?
Yeah.
There's a local pizza place, Mod Pizza, that...
Oh, yeah, they have their own version of Ding Dongs.
Exactly. Yes. Okay, I'm glad.
Yeah.
It comes in the foil and everything.
Yeah.
Well...
they're yummy.
Yeah, Stacy had bought one and had put it aside for her to eat later, and Leia, I come around the corner, and all of that little aluminum foil is like all of it. So not only did she eat chocolate,
right?
But a huge, Leia's a small dog, and that's a huge thing, right? And also all that aluminum foil.
Oh, she ate the foil itself?
Well, I don't know, but
I just find it.
I have a hard time believing that she used her little non-opposing thumbs to open everything up. And so, we're freaking out, and I used AI.
Oh.
I used AI to do a number of things. One is to estimate the amount of cocoa, because that's the thing. Chocolate doesn't necessarily have chocolate beans in it.
Sure.
It can just be sugar and...
Yeah. Especially white chocolate. It's like fat and sugar and vanilla.
So the first thing I wanted it to know was what percentage was in that, and it actually investigated the website for Mod Pizza, and it was like, this sort of number, and I was like, that doesn't help me. I need you to tell me like grams of actual cocoa or whatever because my dog ate one, and the AI is like, oh, that's not a good, well, let's look into it. And, ChatGPT specifically. And it actually eventually spat out a pretty good estimate, which I confirmed later, of the amount of cocoa that was in that thing. And also the potential amount of aluminum foil, and it's real flaky aluminum foil, it's almost
it's
like
that soft kind. Yeah,
it's almost like paper in a way. It's not,
the kind they use for the Voyager.
yeah. I mean, it might literally be a space grade sort of insulation, Anyway, so then it asked me weight of the dog and are there any symptoms, in lieu of actually going to the vet, which could take a while, like I said, 5 hours. And the chatbot said that the chance of the dog experiencing any, especially life-threatening symptoms based on research and weight to chocolate ratio was like almost zero, and to watch out for
Did
throwing
it say,
up.
so therefore we recommend euthanasia? Do you want me to do it right now?
Yeah. We've already done it. There's a drone missile heading towards you. And no. So now I'm guessing there's some of you that are just like, that's disgusting, Kirk. Why are you talking about AI? AI is the scourge of our society and our environment. Okay, I get it. But I was in a fucking pickle.
Yeah.
And I knew that by the time we actually get to the urgent care center and by the time we actually get seen, something horrible could happen.
I think that's a great use of AI as opposed to replacing a human.
and I took it with a grain of salt, right? I'm not like, and I also confirmed a lot of the data. And so, I'm just saying, and it turned out to be fine. She was fine. She didn't have any diarrhea or any kind of discomfort or anything. And she just pooped out the little flakes of aluminum foil eventually. And I told Stacy that she shouldn't put her faux ding-dong within Leia mouth distance.
What if Stacy had been like, what? No, that was me. I was so hungry I didn't bother unwrapping it.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.